But even though John, Paul, George and Ringo were born and grew up quite close to each other, the neighbourhoods are different. So start with Ringo. He had probably the toughest upbringing. The Dingle area is a very working class area. Now at the time, his house, first one he was born into, was what we call a terraced house, like row houses. All houses joined together. He had 3 bedrooms. It had a living room at the front, a kitchen dining room at the back. There's no bathroom in the house, no toilet in the house. A little concrete yard out the back, and the toilet was in the outhouse out there. So it was basic living. His mum and dad separated when he was only 3. He eventually moved with his mum to another house in Admiral Grove, which is only 2 bedrooms. But again, still no bathroom, no toilet. And all the time Ringo lived there, those were the conditions. So when you say that, you grow up in a working class area with no bathroom and no toilet, people go, oh, that must be terrible. But that was typical working class living at the time. That's what everybody lived with, and that's what everybody got on with. So he just accepted that's how it was. So it was a tough upbringing, particularly with no dad being around. His mum Elsie did at least 2 jobs at a time just to keep things going. But the whole idea was you had to get yourself a career. Now, Ringo had 2 really bad illnesses, appendix burst when he was nearly 7, and tuberculosis when he was in his early teens, both life-threatening, but he survived them. The idea was, if you could get an education, but that was always a problem because he missed so much school, but get yourself a decent career. So then he gets an apprenticeship at a local factory, and that's where he forms his first group with his next door neighbour, Eddie Miles. The big problem comes, he's 3 years into a 4-year apprenticeship, and he's in Rory Storm, the Hurricanes, and they're about to go professional. When he says he's going to give that up, his family are furious with him. His fiancée breaks off the wedding, and his mum and dad, well, he's got a stepfather by this time, Harry Graves. All the family saying, don't do it. You're getting this great career ahead of you. Don't throw it all away. But he saw it as his escape. And so, growing up with a tough childhood in a tough area, that makes you into a certain type of character. And so that, I think, all helped towards making Ringo the person he was. And again, he's got that Liverpool sense of humour, which you need to get on. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about the stereotypes of the Beatles, but Ringo was funny, naturally funny, and he had a great personality, and he could get on with just about everybody. So that really helped him. So that's Ringo's childhood and his area. Move on next to George. The area George grew up in Wavertree was quite similar to Ringo's. So again, it's a terraced house. His was a bit more tough from a space point of view because George was the youngest of 4 children. So he had his mum and dad in one bedroom, George, his 2 brothers and sister in the other bedroom. Again, 2 rooms downstairs, no bathroom, no toilet. So that was tough. They got a move then to a brand new housing estate out in Speke in the south of Liverpool. This was a step up for them. 3-bedroomed house. They've got themselves a bathroom and a toilet, a bit of grass outside. So that was a good move for the Harrisons. Paul's is a bit more complicated because Paul was the one who was almost like the nomad of the Beatles. He was born in North Liverpool, but different reasons with his mum and his dad. They made several house moves. So they moved on to the other side of the River Mersey for a short time, back over to Merseyside, into the area of Everton in the north end of Liverpool. Then, when Mary decides she's going to go back to work as a nurse, but as a district nurse and midwife, they get a house with the job. So they move on to the same housing estate where George Harrison's family were going to move. So in 1947, the McCartneys end up in Speke. 1950, the Harrisons end up on the same housing estate. So again, it's a working class area, but the living conditions were nicer. They were much better, certainly for a family, because you've got the little things like the bathroom and the toilet, back garden. So that was nice. So that's how Paul and George met. They went to the same school, so they met on the bus going to school. So that sort of helps a little bit of, not so much movement from the Harrison point of view, but from Paul, yeah, they moved around a heck of a lot. It's only when Paul's 13, they make the final move into Fourth Lane Road. That was the 7th house Paul had lived in by the age of 13, which is a staggering number of moves. That was a step up from Speke. It's a lower middle class area. So Mary thought this was all part of helping her boys get ready for the next stage in life. And of course, obviously, you've got the tragedy. A year after moving in, Paul's mum Mary died from breast cancer. So Paul was only 14. So he's then got a different family dynamic because his dad's trying to bring him up with the help of Jim's sisters, who were great. So it's a good family. So Paul, though, had lost his mum. So then we look at John's story. And John's is fiercely complicated. The number of house moves he makes by the age of 5 is ridiculous. He's getting passed around the family. Of course, his dad's away in the Merchant Navy during the war. So he doesn't really see much of him for the first 3 or 4 years of his life. So he's spending time with his mum. Then his mum and dad can't get it together. Julia's had an affair with a soldier, got pregnant, had a little girl who was put up for adoption. So that's a half-sister John never met. She then meets another guy, John Bobby Dykins. They decide they want to get married. Alf Lennon says he won't give her a divorce. So Julia and Bobby Dykins decide to live in sin, as it was called back then, living together without being married. But they're living in a one-bedroom flat, and little 5-year-old John is sharing a bed with his mum and his mum's boyfriend, which is not ideal. So Julia is determined to keep John, but her father, Pop Stanley, says, no, this isn't happening. Get social services involved. And John is taken away from his mum and given to Julia's older sister, Mimi, who had no kids. So John has that separation from his mum at the age of 5. Goes to live with his Aunt Mimi and Uncle George. But the good thing is, that's the first time in his 5 years of life he's got stability. He's got a lovely house. And this is where, and I know Lou will be able to attest to this, when we go on a Beatles tour with people around Liverpool, we take them on that step of, here's the dingle where Ringo's from. Here's Wavertree, where George Harrison was born. Then we take them out to Woolton, where John lived from the age of 5. And it's a world away from the dingle. It's a middle-class area, what we call semi-detached houses, which are a duplex, I think you call them. A garden at the front side, the rear. John's got his own bedroom. There's a bathroom and a toilet. He's got all the luxuries that the others didn't have. So from John, Paul and George's point of view, sorry, from Paul, George and Ringo's point of view, I should say, John was the rich kid. He was the posh kid. So even though John wrote Working Class Hero, John was never working class. Maybe in his mind he wanted to be, but from his upbringing, from the area he grew up in, he wasn't. He was very middle class. Woolton is still one of the nicest parts of Liverpool. Leafy suburbs, parks everywhere. It's just a beautiful, beautiful, almost like an English village. So even though you're only about 5 miles from the dingle, you might as well be in a completely different city because it is so, so different. So when Brian's trying to portray these 4 tough working class lads from the back streets, from the slums, it was good marketing, but it wasn't accurate. So that all has a different effect. Your family dynamic, but very much the area you're born into gives you your identity. And that was quite different for the four Beatles.
Yeah, if you're there when you go, and I encourage everyone to go, as most of my friends know, four completely different areas where they grew up, the neighborhoods themselves, and I'm sure the interactions that they had among friends uh, was very, very different. One thing that I did think about also is, without getting too much into the psychology of them, but not just the neighborhoods they grew up in, but even the households that they grew up in, I think kind of had an effect on them once they became the Beatles. And I'll say it this way. John grew up, as David said, in kind of a leafy suburb. He pretty much from the age of 5, when he was in Woolton, he was an only child, essentially an only child. So he found his friendships within the neighborhood, and he formed a gang with Pete Shotton and Ivan Vaughan, Nigel Walley, and he formed a gang. He always liked to be in a gang, but he was always the leader. He wanted to be the leader. Paul grew up moving from place to place, and he never settled in, never settled, down, too much in any one place before they were moving on, as David mentioned. But he also grew up in a household where he was the big brother. And George grew up in a household, his older sister moved away when he was, sort of young. So he really grew up, he was probably closest to his two older brothers. And he grew up, the younger brother to two older brothers. Ringo grew up as an only child. And David mentions, how he kind of tried to get along with everybody. I kind of know that feeling. I'm an only child. And you don't look to anyone as being your brother or your sister, so you kind of look to everyone to be your brother and sister, and you have relationships with your cousins that may be closer than ordinary cousins, etc. But when you think about when they got into the band, when those four people got into the band, you had John with a new gang, and he was the leader. You had Paul, who always looked down on at least George as a younger brother, as he may have done with his brother Mike. You had George always feeling, once again, I have two older brothers again. I'm going to have to, push my way through and make sure I stand up for myself. And you had Ringo trying to get along with everyone. So I kind of see a similarity even within the Beatles, as each of them in their own families, they've kind of had similar roles.